My son punched me in the jaw so hard I saw fireworks. My daughter-in-law dragged me out of my own house by my hair, my slippers scraping the icy front steps, while the neighbor's porch lights blinked on one by one down Maplewood Lane. All over $5 million. That's what my life came down to. Not love. Not family. 5 million and a bruised cheekbone. If you think this kind of betrayal only happens in tabloid headlines, let me tell you, sometimes it's your own flesh and blood. Sometimes, it's the hand you once held steady for their first steps that pushes you out into the cold. If you're watching right now and you've ever been pushed aside by someone you raised, or if you know someone who has, share your story in the comments. Subscribe if you believe in justice, in truth, in standing up for yourself, even if it's against your own family. Because silence only helps the ones who want to erase you. It started 3 months ago, just after my 72nd birthday. I moved in with my son, Daniel, and his wife, Marissa, not because I couldn't live alone anymore, but because Daniel said he worried about me. It's too quiet out in Larchmont, he told me on the phone. You need more family around, Mom. Nora wants her grandma close. Nora, my only granddaughter, sweet as summer peaches. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe they wanted me, not my money. They'd bought a stately old colonial on Sycamore Street, white siding, red shutters, and a wraparound porch lined with potted hydrangeas. I remember the first night there, Marissa had set fresh sheets on the bed, soft yellow ones with tiny blue wildflowers. She'd left a note on the nightstand, "Welcome home, Mom. We're so glad you're here." There was a little plate of lemon shortbread cookies and a candle that smelled like honeysuckle. I took it all in with a heart so full I thought it might burst. Maybe, finally, I would get the closeness I'd missed since Daniel left for college. Those first days were easy, almost sweet. Marissa made strong coffee in the mornings, and Daniel fussed over my suitcase, insisting I let him carry it upstairs. They invited me into every room, every conversation. Nora would come home from school, fling her backpack into my lap, and demand stories about the summers the first spent working at the Greenway Diner, how I met her grandfather, how we built a life out of secondhand furniture and hope. There was so much laughter, and I found myself thinking, maybe I can belong here. But even honeysuckle fades. It started with little things. Marissa asked me to chip in for groceries, a carton of eggs, a loaf of rye bread, a jar of that fancy fig jam she liked for her breakfast toast. It was nothing at first, just a few dollars. Then Daniel started leaving the electric bill on my nightstand. "Just so we can keep track," he said, voice casual, eyes a little too bright. They asked about my Social Security, my pension, my late husband's investment accounts. "For emergencies, Mom. Just in case." One evening, I came downstairs and found Marissa at my laptop. She said she was updating my antivirus software. I wanted to believe her, but I knew she'd never asked for the password before. I told myself I was overreacting. After all, what's family if not a little trust? But I started to keep my purse zipped, my checkbook hidden under sweaters, my phone passcode changed weekly. The unease grew, like the slow chill that seeps in when you leave a window cracked on a winter night. Marissa was all smiles and soft words by day, but I began to notice the changes. She started talking about private schools for Nora, about how expensive everything had become, how we all need to do our part. Daniel began mentioning a business opportunity. A sure thing, he said, a friend at the golf club, something about real estate and guaranteed double returns. I recognized the old urge in his voice, that restless hunger I'd seen when he was young, the same look he gave me the summer he took out a loan behind my back and asked for forgiveness, not permission. The requests became demands. "We should streamline your finances, Mom, put things in one account, just for convenience," Daniel insisted one morning as I poured coffee into my favorite chipped mug. Marissa said joint accounts would simplify things. I told them I'd think about it, but my heart hammered so hard I worried they could see it pulsing under my bathrobe. That afternoon, I called my bank from my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. I set up alerts on all my accounts. I didn't know what I was protecting, only that I needed to do it quietly, before it was too late. Days slipped into weeks. The house grew smaller. Daniel stopped looking me in the eye at dinner. Marissa began sighing loudly when I entered the kitchen. Nora grew quiet, watching everything with big eyes. The warmth vanished. In its place was a silent calculation, every word weighed, every kindness measured. I knew something was coming, but I didn't know how bad it would get until the night everything exploded. Until the night Daniel's fist met my cheek, and Marissa's hand tangled in my hair, and the neighbors called 911 because the screaming finally got too loud to ignore. If you've read this far, tell me, has anyone ever tried to take from you what you spent your life building? What would you do if the people you loved most became the ones you feared? Leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe, because what happened next will shock you. And maybe, just maybe, it will help someone else survive. My son punched me in the jaw so hard I saw fireworks. My daughter-in-law dragged me out of my own house by my hair, my slippers scraping the icy front steps, while the neighbor's porch lights blinked on one by one down Maplewood Lane. All over $5 million. That's what my life came down to. Not love. Not family. 5 million and a bruised cheekbone. If you think this kind of betrayal only happens in tabloid headlines, let me tell you, sometimes it's your own flesh and blood. Sometimes, it's the hand you once held steady for their first steps that pushes you out into the cold. If you're watching right now and you've ever been pushed aside by someone you raised, or if you know someone who has, share your story in the comments. Subscribe if you believe in justice, in truth, in standing up for yourself, even if it's against your own family. Because silence only helps the ones who want to erase you. It started 3 months ago, just after my 72nd birthday. I moved in with my son, Daniel, and his wife, Marissa, not because I couldn't live alone anymore, but because Daniel said he worried about me. It's too quiet out in Larchmont, he told me on the phone, you need more family around, Mom. Nora wants her grandma close. Nora, my only granddaughter, sweet as summer peaches. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe they wanted me, not my money. They'd bought a stately old colonial on Sycamore Street, white siding, red shutters, and a wraparound porch lined with potted hydrangeas. I remember the first night there, Marissa had set fresh sheets on the bed, soft yellow ones with tiny blue wildflowers. She'd left a note on the nightstand, "Welcome home, Mom. We're so glad you're here." There was a little plate of lemon shortbread cookies and a candle that smelled like honeysuckle. I took it all in with a heart so full I thought it might burst. Maybe, finally, I would get the closeness I'd missed since Daniel left for college. Those first days were easy, almost sweet. Marissa made strong coffee in the mornings, and Daniel fussed over my suitcase, insisting I let him carry it upstairs. They invited me into every room, every conversation. Nora would come home from school, fling her backpack into my lap, and demand stories about the summers the first spent working at the Greenway Diner, how I met her grandfather, how we built a life out of secondhand furniture and hope. There was so much laughter, and I found myself thinking, maybe I can belong here. But even honeysuckle fades. It started with little things. Marissa asked me to chip in for groceries, a carton of eggs, a loaf of rye bread, a jar of that fancy fig jam she liked for her breakfast toast. It was nothing at first, just a few dollars. Then Daniel started leaving the electric bill on my nightstand. "Just so we can keep track," he said, voice casual, eyes a little too bright. They asked about my Social Security, my pension, my late husband's investment accounts. "For emergencies, Mom. Just in case." One evening, I came downstairs and found Marissa at my laptop. She said she was updating my antivirus software. I wanted to believe her, but I knew she'd never asked for the password before. I told myself I was overreacting. After all, what's family if not a little trust? But I started to keep my purse zipped, my checkbook hidden under sweaters, my phone passcode changed weekly. The unease grew, like the slow chill that seeps in when you leave a window cracked on a winter night. Marissa was all smiles and soft words by day, but I began to notice the changes. She started talking about private schools for Nora, about how expensive everything had become, how we all need to do our part. Daniel began mentioning a business opportunity. A sure thing, he said, a friend at the golf club, something about real estate and guaranteed double returns. I recognized the old urge in his voice, that restless hunger I'd seen when he was young, the same look he gave me the summer he took out a loan behind my back and asked for forgiveness, not permission. The requests became demands. We should streamline your finances, Mom, put things in one account, just for convenience, Daniel insisted one morning as I poured coffee into my favorite chipped mug. Marissa said joint accounts would simplify things. I told them I'd think about it, but my heart hammered so hard I worried they could see it pulsing under my bathrobe. That afternoon, I called my bank from my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. I set up alerts on all my accounts. I didn't know what I was protecting, only that I needed to do it quietly, before it was too late. Days slipped into weeks. The house grew smaller. Daniel stopped looking me in the eye at dinner. Marissa began sighing loudly when I entered the kitchen. Nora grew quiet, watching everything with big eyes. The warmth vanished. In its place was a silent calculation, every word weighed, every kindness measured. I knew something was coming, but I didn't know how bad it would get until the night everything exploded. Until the night Daniel's fist met my cheek, and Marissa's hand tangled in my hair, and the neighbors called 911 because the screaming finally got too loud to ignore. If you've read this far, tell me, has anyone ever tried to take from you what you spent your life building? What would you do if the people you loved most became the ones you feared? Leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe, because what happened next will shock you. And maybe, just maybe, it will help someone else survive. The next morning, a knock at my door startled me awake. I hesitated, heart pounding, and peered through the peephole. It was Mrs. Cho, her arms full with a pot of soup and a brown paper bag. You look like you could use a friend, she said softly when I opened the door. I let her in and, for the first time, allowed myself to lean on someone. She set the pot on the stove, ladled broth into a mug, and handed it to me with both hands. I sipped and let the warmth settle inside. Don't let shame keep you silent, she said, almost as if she could read my mind. After she left, I tried to busy myself with ordinary things. I folded laundry, rearranged the kitchen drawers, swept the hallway. Still, my mind spun with what-ifs and regrets. I kept checking my phone, expecting some message from Daniel, some apology, some attempt at explanation. But nothing came. Only silence. That afternoon, I called my sister Elaine in Florida. The distance between us had grown over the years. She had her own life, her own family, and we'd always been close in a way that didn't require constant words. But this time, when I heard her voice, something broke. I told her everything, every detail, every humiliation, the fear, the ache, the betrayal. She listened, only interrupting to murmur, "Oh, honey, and, you didn't deserve that." By the end, I was weeping. She promised to call every day, no matter what. "If you ever want to come down here, you have a room," she said. Just hearing those words, just knowing I had somewhere else I could go, was like a balm. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise in the hallway sent a jolt through me. I worried about the locks, the windows, the mail slot. I double-checked every door before crawling into bed, hugging a pillow to my chest as if it could keep the world at bay. Sometime around 3 a.m., I heard voices outside my window, teenagers probably, laughing as they passed. But my body remained rigid, trapped in vigilance. By sunrise, I was exhausted, but I forced myself up, made coffee, and tried to eat a piece of toast. I pulled out a notebook and began making lists. What accounts did I need to secure? Who needed to be notified? What about my will, my health directives? I remembered the documents Mr. Fishman had helped me gather, my deed to the Larchmont apartment, my late husband's insurance policies, the folder of stock certificates I'd kept hidden in an old recipe tin. I sorted everything out on the kitchen table, labeling files, taping passwords to the inside of a cupboard only I ever opened. That's when the first text from Marissa came. Just 4 words, please call us. Urgent. I stared at the screen, hands trembling. I wanted to believe it was concern, that Daniel regretted what he'd done, that Marissa wanted to make things right. But then I remembered the coldness in her eyes, the calculated way she had handled my affairs, the way she always seemed to be watching, even when she smiled. I put the phone down and did not respond. By noon, there were 3 more messages, one from Daniel, one from Marissa, and one from an unknown number that simply read, "We need to talk. Now." My heart raced as I read them, but I forced myself to breathe. I called Mr. Fishman, told him about the messages. He advised, do not respond. Forward everything to me. If they're contacting you directly, it means they're nervous. It means you've taken power back. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived at my door, handwritten, the address in Daniel's blocky script. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside, the words were careful, almost sterile. Mom, please call us. This is all a misunderstanding. We just want to talk. Love, Daniel. I set it aside, knowing full well the difference between love and control. I made myself a cup of tea and tried to let it go, but the ache settled in my bones. That evening, I went for a walk around the block, hoping the movement would calm my nerves. The air smelled faintly of lilacs and rain. I passed children riding bikes, a couple walking their dog, a jogger waving hello. For a moment, I envied their normalcy. I wondered if any of them suspected what was happening behind the doors of the brick apartment building, if they'd ever felt this kind of betrayal in their own lives. Back home, I flipped on the news just for the company of voices. There was a story about elder abuse in a neighboring county. A woman's daughter had drained her accounts, sold her car, and left her in a nursing home. The anchor's tone was somber, and the woman's face on the screen was lined with pain and humiliation. I watched, transfixed, as she told her story. For the first time, I didn't feel quite so alone. That night, before bed, I wrote in my journal. I wrote about the boy Daniel once was, the man he'd become, and the chasm between those two people. I wrote about Marissa's ambition, her charm, her cold calculations. I wrote about the pain of being invisible in your own family, the fear of growing old in a world that wants to forget you. I wrote until my hand ached, until I felt emptied out, lighter somehow, even as the grief lingered. The next day, I woke with a new kind of determination. If Daniel and Marissa wanted to make this a battle, I would not cower. I would defend what was mine, my home, my money, my dignity. I spent the morning at the bank, meeting with the branch manager, a young woman named Olivia who listened with grave attention as I explained my situation. She reviewed my accounts, added new security layers, flagged my file for any suspicious activity, and arranged for alerts to be sent directly to my lawyer. When I left the bank, I felt a small measure of control return. That afternoon, I called Elaine again and told her what I'd done. She cheered. "That's my big sister," she said, voice proud. It was a little victory, but it mattered. For anyone watching, if you've ever been made to feel powerless by the people who should protect you most, know this: you are not alone. You have rights. You have power. And sometimes, courage means simply refusing to give up what's yours. Share your story in the comments and subscribe for the next chapter, because what happened next changed everything. The days that followed settled into a strange, uneasy routine. Each morning, I woke with the sun but felt the heaviness of dread draped over my shoulders. I checked my email first thing, scrolling past spam and coupons to search for anything from Daniel or Marissa. Instead, I found a message from Nora's school, a reminder about Grandparents' Day, the event I'd always loved. Last year, I'd brought in sugar cookies shaped like autumn leaves and read a story to Nora's class. This year, I wasn't invited. It wasn't a mistake. It was Marissa's handwriting on the RSVP line, a neat X through my name. The pain of that rejection landed heavier than any bruise. I tried to keep busy. I cleaned out closets, sorted old tax forms, even took a few long walks by the river. The world outside kept spinning, kids zipped by on scooters, shopkeepers waved, dogs barked at the mailman, but inside, my world was still. I had become invisible, a shadow gliding through the edges of my own life. But I refused to disappear completely. That Wednesday, Mr. Fishman called. "There's been activity on your accounts," he said, his voice tense. "Someone tried to reset your online banking password from an unfamiliar device." I felt a chill race up my spine. "We blocked it, but I recommend you change your passwords again and enable two-factor authentication on everything." He walked me through the process, step by step. After the call, I sat staring at my phone. How quickly family can become a threat. How quickly love can turn to suspicion. That afternoon, as rain pattered against the windows, I went through an old shoebox of photographs. There was Daniel at 5, grinning, cheeks streaked with chocolate from his birthday cake. Marissa on her wedding day, looking radiant and nervous, holding my hand just before walking down the aisle. Nora as a baby, bundled in a pink blanket, fast asleep on my chest. The memories ached. I longed to go back, to erase the cracks, to start again before things had turned so bitter. The next day, I went to see my doctor for a follow-up appointment. The nurse, Alice, was gentle as she examined the fading bruise on my cheek. She asked if I was safe at home. I hesitated, then told her the truth, that I was staying alone for now, that I had support. She nodded, made a note in my chart, and handed me a pamphlet about elder abuse. "Just in case," she whispered. I tucked it into my purse, not sure if I was comforted or exposed. Back at home, the loneliness pressed in again. I missed Nora's laughter, the way she'd curl into my lap and beg for one more story. I missed Daniel's old sense of humor, the quick hugs, the way he used to call me Mama B. It's a special kind of grief to lose people who are still alive. That afternoon, I called Elaine again, just to hear her voice. We talked about the weather, her grandkids' soccer games, the latest book she was reading. Ordinary things, but every conversation stitched me back together a little more. That evening, I heard a commotion in the hallway, raised voices, hurried footsteps, the slam of a door. I peeked through the peephole. It was only the college kids from 2 floors down arguing over pizza money, but my body stayed tense, heart thudding against my ribs. Trauma rewires your instincts, makes every shadow a threat. A few days later, I received a certified letter in the mail. The envelope was thick, the return address a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside, I found a formal notice. Daniel and Marissa were petitioning for conservatorship over my finances, citing mental decline and concerns for my welfare. My hands shook as I read the words. They'd listed incidents that never happened, conversations twisted beyond recognition. They claimed I was forgetful, paranoid, unable to manage my own affairs. I sat at my kitchen table, breath coming in shallow gasps. My own son was trying to erase me, on paper, in court, in the eyes of the law. I called Mr. Fishman in a panic. He listened as I read him the letter, then calmly outlined our next steps. "You have every right to contest this, Mrs. Burke. And you're not alone. We'll gather documentation, your medical records, cognitive evaluations, testimony from neighbors and friends. The courts don't just take a family's word for it." His assurance soothed me, but only slightly. I'd seen stories in the news about families winning cases like this, about people being stripped of their autonomy overnight. That night, I slept little. I dreamed of running through empty hallways, searching for Daniel, calling his name. He never turned around. I woke tangled in sheets, gasping for air. The next morning, I made a plan. I called my doctor's office and requested a cognitive assessment, scheduled an appointment with my therapist, and began writing down everything, every interaction, every message, every detail I could remember. I started a folder labeled Defense. It felt both surreal and necessary. Throughout the week, the calls from Daniel and Marissa increased. Sometimes it was anger, "Mom, why are you doing this to us?" Sometimes it was guilt, "We're just trying to help you." Other times, it was silence. I could hear them breathing on the line, waiting for me to say something that would give them power. I refused to answer. But the worst was the call from Nora. Her voice was tiny, uncertain. "Grandma, are you okay? Mommy says you're sick, but I don't believe her. Can I come visit you?" My throat closed. I wanted to say yes, to promise her everything would be okay. Instead, I told her I loved her more than anything, that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, that none of this was her fault. After I hung up, I cried until my chest hurt. For anyone who has ever had to defend their own mind, their independence, their right to exist as more than an inconvenience, know that you are stronger than you think. If you've faced something like this, share your story below. Subscribe for the next chapter, because what came next would show me just how far a mother will go to protect what's left of herself. The morning of my cognitive assessment, I sat in the waiting room clutching my purse like a lifeline. The walls were painted a cheerful shade of mint, but the air inside was heavy, every breath tinged with anxiety. When the nurse called my name, my knees nearly buckled. I thought of Daniel and Marissa, of their petition, the lies written in neat legalese. I was determined to prove myself, not just to the court, but to myself. The assessment took nearly 2 hours, memory games, word tests, puzzles, the kind of questions you think you'll never forget until your mind is blank and the pressure is on. I stumbled once, forgetting the name of a flower, Iris. It was Iris, I remembered later in the elevator. But I did well. The doctor smiled gently as she wrapped up the session. "Your cognitive function is excellent, Mrs. Burke. There's nothing here that concerns me." I left the office lighter, hope flickering at the edges of my fear. When I got home, I found a stack of mail waiting. Most of it was junk, but among the flyers and bills was another envelope from the law firm. This time it was a notice of hearing, 3 weeks from now, in the county courthouse. I called Mr. Fishman, read him the letter, and heard him exhale on the other end. "We have time," he said. "I'll file our response and gather statements. Just keep documenting everything." Those days passed slowly, marked by routines. I visited the bakery beneath Mr. Fishman's office every Thursday for a cinnamon roll and black coffee. The owner, a kind woman named Rosa, began setting aside my order, no questions asked. I felt comforted by these small rituals, the familiarity of a smiling face, the smell of fresh bread, the sunlight slanting through the windows. But the fear never fully left. Every time my phone rang, I tensed. Marissa's number flashed across the screen twice a day, sometimes more. Daniel called less, but his messages were shorter, angrier. "Why are you making this harder than it has to be? You're tearing our family apart." Each accusation cut deeper than the last. I never replied, but I saved everything. My sister Elaine called every evening, reading to me from her garden in Florida, stories about her grandkids, jokes about her noisy neighbors, little bits of warmth sent across the miles. She reminded me of the woman I used to be, before fear became my constant companion. "Don't let them take any more from you," she said one night. "You've survived worse." A week before the hearing, I met with my therapist, Dr. Rowland. She was a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes who had helped me through my husband's illness and death. I told her everything, from the first uneasy feeling when I moved in with Daniel and Marissa, to the night the police came, to the ache of being cut out of Nora's life. They want me to feel small, I said. They want to erase me. Dr. Rowland nodded. You can't control their choices, but you can control how you respond. This hearing is your chance to reclaim your story, Mrs. Burke. That night, I wrote a letter to the judge, just as Dr. Rowland suggested. Not a legal document, but a letter from a mother to the court. I wrote about my life, my work at the diner, the decades I spent raising Daniel alone after his father died, the pride I felt at his graduation, the joy of Nora's birth. I wrote about Marissa's charm, how I welcomed her into our family, how I had wanted so desperately for us to be close. And I wrote about the betrayal, the slow shift from love to manipulation, the humiliation of being asked for money, the agony of being called unstable. I poured everything into that letter, every hurt and every hope. Mr. Fishman was moved when I showed him the draft. We'll submit this as part of your response, he said. Sometimes, the truth needs to be heard in your own voice. He promised to add letters from my doctor, my neighbors, and from Mrs. Cho, who had witnessed my daily routines and my clarity of mind. The days before the hearing crawled by. I barely slept, replaying every possible scenario in my mind. Would Daniel lie under oath? Would Marissa spin another story about my decline? Would the judge believe them, or me? I clung to the facts, to my letter, to the words of my sister and therapist. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. I chose a navy blue skirt and a soft white blouse, the kind my husband had always said made me look like myself. I pinned my hair back, dabbed powder over the last traces of the bruise. As I left the apartment, Mrs. Cho stopped me in the hall and pressed a tiny paper crane into my hand. For luck, she whispered. The courthouse was colder than I remembered. Mr. Fishman met me at the steps, files in hand. We sat side by side at a long wooden table, the courtroom humming with quiet tension. Daniel and Marissa sat across from me. Daniel refused to meet my eyes. Marissa wore a pale pink suit, her lips pressed into a tight line. The judge entered, stern but attentive. The proceedings began. Their lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of a confused, fragile woman in need of protection. He described episodes of forgetfulness, invented emergencies, imaginary threats. Marissa nodded along, eyes wide, hand clutching Daniel's arm for effect. Then it was our turn. Mr. Fishman laid out my medical reports, the cognitive assessment, the letters from friends and neighbors. He read my letter to the court, my words, my story. The room was silent as he finished. I waited, hands clenched in my lap, as the judge reviewed the evidence. Finally, she looked up, her gaze steady. Mrs. Burke, do you wish to speak? My voice shook at first, but I spoke my truth. I told her I was not confused, not fragile, not invisible. I told her I had survived heartbreak and built a life from nothing. I told her that all I wanted was the chance to finish my story on my own terms. When I sat down, I felt the room exhale. The judge nodded and recessed. I closed my eyes and let hope settle quietly beside me. I was not erased, not yet. For those of you who've ever faced a room determined to silence you, hold your ground. The next part of my story will reveal just how far a mother's resolve can carry her. Subscribe, comment, and share, your voice matters too. The judge's chambers felt colder during the recess, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the tension. I sat beside Mr. Fishman, my knuckles white against the file of documents I still clutched, barely breathing as I replayed every word in my mind. From across the aisle, Daniel whispered urgently to Marissa. She sat rigid, her fingers tapping an impatient staccato against her purse. In those moments, it was painfully clear how far we drifted from the family we used to be. When the judge returned, she summarized the evidence and paused, her gaze heavy on Daniel and Marissa. It's rare to see so much documentation and such consistent testimony in these matters, she said. I see no grounds for conservatorship or financial guardianship. Mrs. Burke has demonstrated full capacity to manage her own affairs. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with something close to relief. The judge turned to me directly. You are under no obligation to share your resources, your home, or your decisions with anyone, not even your family, if you do not wish to. The court strongly cautions all parties to respect Mrs. Burke's autonomy moving forward. I exhaled, my whole body trembling. The words felt like a door swinging open, a door I feared might have slammed shut forever. Mr. Fishman squeezed my shoulder. Daniel looked away, cheeks flushed. Marissa pressed her lips together, as if holding back words she knew would do her no good. The court session ended with the official record reflecting my competence and independence. Outside, the day was brighter than when I'd arrived, a crisp wind snapping the courthouse flags. Mr. Fishman congratulated me, offering to walk me to my car. Be careful, he warned quietly. Sometimes, the fight doesn't end just because the law is on your side. Watch your accounts. Watch your door. I drove home with the windows down, breathing in the chill, letting it sting my cheeks as proof that I was still here, still fighting. As I turned onto my street, I saw Mrs. Cho waiting on her stoop, a gentle wave ready for me. Well, she called. I simply nodded, letting the tears I'd held back finally fall. She hugged me, wordless, her arms solid and warm. That night, for the first time in weeks, I let myself sleep deeply, the court order tucked safely under my pillow. In the morning, I awoke with a curious lightness, as if someone had opened a window in a room I'd long believed was sealed. I made pancakes for breakfast, humming to myself, and watered the violets in my kitchen window. But the relief was short-lived. That afternoon, Daniel called. His voice was flat, exhausted. Mom, I'm sorry things got so out of hand. For a moment, the old ache flickered. Was this the apology I needed? But then he continued. Marissa's upset. She says you've poisoned everything. Nora keeps asking for you. I wish you'd just gone along with the plan. It would have been easier for all of us. I listened, silent. He sighed, well, I hope you're happy. And then, just like that, he hung up. The weight of his words pressed against my chest. Happiness, what did it mean anymore? Did it mean safety? Solitude? Or had I lost something too precious in saving myself? I sat by the window for a long time, watching the wind swirl golden leaves across the sidewalk, feeling the ache of emptiness and the strange new pulse of freedom. A few days later, Marissa showed up at my apartment unannounced. She stood in the hallway, crisp and composed in her tailored coat, a bouquet of sunflowers in her hand. For you, she said, her voice too bright. I wanted to talk. I let her in, wary but polite, and we sat at the table where I had sorted so many old letters, where I'd once braided Nora's hair. Marissa launched straight into her pitch. Look, I know things got ugly, but you have to admit, Daniel and I have worked hard for what we have. It's not easy raising a family. All we wanted was to make things easier for everyone. You could help, and in return, we could. She stopped, searching my face for a sign of weakness. Don't you want to be taken care of, Helen? I met her gaze, steady and unblinking. I want to be respected, I said quietly. And I want my granddaughter to know that love isn't a transaction. I'm not an open wallet. I'm her grandmother. That's enough. For a moment, I thought she might cry. But instead, her jaw tightened. You're making a mistake, she said. Daniel might never forgive you. Nora will grow up thinking you didn't care. She left the sunflowers on the table, the stems already wilting. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt both emptier and lighter at the same time. That night, I called Elaine. I told her about the hearing, about Daniel's call, about Marissa's visit. She listened, as always, her voice strong. "You did the right thing," she said. "Sometimes doing the right thing means letting go of what you wish people were, and seeing them for who they really are." I sat with those words for a long time. The following week was a blur of small victories and quiet heartbreaks. I started going to a book group at the library, reconnected with Irene from Bridge Club, and took long walks along the river. The world felt bigger again, full of possibility. But every so often, I caught myself checking my phone for messages from Nora that never came. One afternoon, I found a crayon drawing slipped under my apartment door. It was Nora's careful handwriting. "I love you, Grandma. Please come back." Tears blurred the page. I pressed the drawing to my heart, vowing that, no matter what Daniel and Marissa chose, would never let my granddaughter forget that she was loved. If you're listening and you've ever had to choose between your dignity and your family's approval, I want you to know, you are not alone. Sometimes, saving yourself is the bravest thing you'll ever do. Comment below if you've faced this crossroad, and subscribe for the next part. The road ahead held more tests, and I was only beginning to discover the true strength I had left. A week drifted by, each day a little easier, though a dull ache lingered in my chest. The leaves outside turned crimson and gold, swirling along the curb where children laughed on their way to school. I kept busy, joining a memoir writing class at the community center, hoping to fill the hours with stories that belonged to me, not to Daniel or Marissa. The act of writing, the scrape of pen against paper, felt healing, like a way to claim my voice again. One afternoon, Mrs. Cho knocked, carrying a small pie, steam rising from the vents in the crust. "Apple and cranberry," she said, setting it on the table. "For strength." We sat and shared thick slices with mugs of tea, talking about everything except family. She told me about her childhood in Seoul, her stubborn brother, the way she and her sisters used to sneak out at night and leave love notes for their favorite neighbors. Her laughter filled my kitchen, and for the first time in months, I let myself truly smile. That evening, as dusk settled, I received a letter from my granddaughter Nora. The envelope was addressed in her careful block letters, stickers of stars and puppies dotting the corners. Inside, she'd drawn a picture, the two of us in the garden, planting seeds together, our faces beaming under the sun. Below, she'd written, "I miss you, Grandma. Mommy says you're sick, but I know you're strong." I pressed the letter to my cheek, tears slipping down my face. That little note was a lifeline, proof that love could survive even the darkest storms. Emboldened, I called Nora's school and asked to speak to her teacher, Mrs. Whitmore. I explained the situation, careful not to disparage Daniel or Marissa, but letting her know I missed my granddaughter and hoped to stay in touch. Mrs. Whitmore was understanding and promised to pass along a message, reminding me there were still people in the world willing to do the right thing. The next day, I received an email from a local support group for seniors who'd experienced family estrangement or financial abuse. It was a resource Mr. Fishman had quietly suggested, and though I felt embarrassed, I decided to attend a meeting. The group gathered in a modest church basement, the chairs set in a gentle circle, the smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls lingering in the air. There, I listened as women and men told their stories, some more heartbreaking than mine, some brimming with hope. We were a chorus of survivors, each with our own wounds, and in that circle, the shame faded just a little. I stood up and spoke, my voice shaky at first but growing stronger as I described what had happened. The room offered nothing but empathy and understanding, and by the end, I was hugging strangers who felt like old friends. Returning home that night, I found an email from Marissa. The tone had changed, no more threats, no more accusations, just a single line, "Nora misses you. Maybe we can talk." For a moment, my heart leapt. But caution kept me from answering too quickly. Instead, I called Elaine, read her the message, and listened as she reminded me that manipulation can sometimes wear the mask of reconciliation. Days passed without another word from Daniel or Marissa, and I tried to focus on building my new routines. I walked to the market on Saturdays, joined a quilting group at the senior center, volunteered once a week shelving books at the library. I found comfort in these ordinary tasks, small acts of service that anchored me to the present. Mrs. Cho and I developed a rhythm, trading recipes and tending her rooftop herb garden together. My world, once shrunk by fear, began to expand again. Then, one Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Daniel on my front step, hands in his pockets, eyes rimmed with red. He looked smaller than I remembered, older, tired, shadows haunting his face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Can I come in, Mom?" I hesitated, instinct warring with hope. But I stepped aside and let him in. He sat at the kitchen table, twisting his wedding ring as if it burned. "I messed up," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Marissa," she pushed and I didn't stop her. "I should have protected you." His eyes flickered, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be. He told me about the strain at home, about how the conservatorship fight had opened a rift between him and Marissa, about Nora crying at night, asking why she couldn't see her grandmother. He admitted to the pressure, the mortgage, the bills, the endless expectation that I'd bail them out just one more time. We got greedy. I got scared. He apologized, not for the first time, but this time there was something raw, something real behind the words. I listened, my hands folded in my lap. I told him how his actions had hurt me, how betrayal from a child cuts deeper than any wound. I told him I still loved him, but I needed boundaries. If we were ever to rebuild, it would have to start with honesty and respect, not need, not guilt, not money. Daniel wept then, and I did too. For everything we'd lost, and for the small sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could heal. We sat together until the tea went cold, until the silence became comfortable again. After he left, I called Elaine. She said, "Forgiveness is a gift, but it doesn't mean forgetting. You get to decide what family looks like from here on out." I thought of Nora's letter, of Mrs. Cho's pie, of the women in the support group. My life was bigger than this pain. For those watching, who've ever been given an apology you weren't sure you could trust, how did you know when to let someone back in? Comment below, and subscribe for the next chapter, because healing is a journey, and the story wasn't over yet. The next few days moved gently, like waking from a long storm. Daniel's visit left me raw and hopeful at once, emotions running in unpredictable currents. Each morning, I found myself pausing by the kitchen window, searching for signs that something, anything, was changing. I checked my phone too often, half dreading and half wishing for messages from Daniel or Marissa. Sometimes, the only thing that came was a meme from Elaine or a picture from the seniors' quilting group. Still, every small kindness felt like a thread, stitching me back together. One chilly afternoon, as I walked home from the library, I found Nora and Marissa waiting by my building. Nora ran to me, arms wide, her backpack bouncing behind her. "Grandma," she shouted. For a split second, everything else vanished. I scooped her up, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo, my heart both soaring and aching. Marissa approached more slowly, her posture uncertain. She didn't have her usual edge. "Hi, Helen," she said quietly. She looked tired, lines carved deep at the corners of her mouth, her eyes soft, almost pleading. "Nora's been begging to see you. I thought, maybe we could talk." I nodded, ushering them both inside, reminding myself to take things one breath at a time. We sat in the living room, the afternoon sun painting golden stripes across the carpet. Nora plopped onto the rug, flipping through her favorite picture book. Marissa perched on the edge of the couch, hands fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "I owe you an apology," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I lost perspective. I let money get in the way of family, and I pushed Daniel until he stopped standing up for himself, or for you. I'm sorry. She wiped at her eyes, looking as if she'd rehearsed these words 100 times, yet they came out rough and real. I studied her, seeing for the first time not just my adversary, but a woman scared of failing at everything, wife, mother, daughter-in-law. We all lost our way, I admitted, my voice thick. I let fear close me off. I let pain keep me from forgiving. We can't fix everything today, but we can start with Nora. Nora, oblivious to the weight of our conversation, climbed into my lap and asked for a story. So I read aloud, voice trembling at first, then steady. Marissa listened quietly, hands folded, eyes closed, as if she, too, needed a story with a gentler ending. When it was time to leave, Marissa hugged me, not tightly, but genuinely. If you want to see Nora, anytime, let me know, she whispered. There was no mention of money, no requests, just the faint hope that we might build something new out of all the broken pieces. After they left, I sat in silence, Nora's laughter echoing in the corners of my home. The pain was still there, but it was softer now, edged with the possibility of healing. I called Elaine, telling her everything. It's a good sign, she said. But take it slow. People don't change overnight. Protect your heart, but don't harden it. That night, I returned to my journal, writing not just about the pain, but about hope, the simple joy of reading to my granddaughter, the awkward apology from Marissa, the uncertain peace settling over us. I wrote that forgiveness was less a single moment and more 100 small decisions, made every day, to open a door instead of slamming it shut. Days passed. Daniel called again, this time to thank me for seeing Nora and to ask if we could meet for coffee. We met at the little cafe on Willow Avenue, where the air always smelled like cinnamon and fresh scones. Daniel looked better, his shoulders less hunched, his smile less forced. We talked about Nora's science project, the local news, even the weather. For the first time, our conversation felt like a conversation, not a negotiation. Eventually, he brought up the hearing, his voice low. I was angry and scared. I thought if we could just control things, make sure you were safe, and if we could pay off some bills, it would all work out. He shook his head. I know now how wrong that was. I promise you, Mom, I'm going to earn your trust back. No more schemes. No more secrets. I sipped my coffee, searching his face for any trace of deception. There was none, only the earnestness of a son finally learning to listen. Trust takes time, I told him. We both have work to do. He nodded, understanding. We parted with a hug, not as tight as years past, but honest. I spent the next week rediscovering my own life. I finished a quilt for the support group, piecing together scraps of fabric that didn't seem to match until, in the end, they formed something strong and beautiful. I started leading story hour at the library, sharing tales with children who reminded me of Nora. I volunteered at the food pantry, surprised to find how good it felt to serve without obligation or strings attached. Nora visited again, each time more relaxed, her questions about the fight growing fewer. One day, as we baked cookies together, she asked, Grandma, will you always be here for me? I knelt beside her, brushing flour from her cheek. Always, honey. No matter what happens between the grown-ups, I'll always love you. She smiled, the simple faith of a child restoring a piece of my own. For those watching, healing doesn't happen all at once. It's messy, uneven, sometimes painful. But if you're in the middle of your own storm, I promise, there's another side. Share your stories in the comments, and subscribe for the next part. My journey was far from over, and the biggest test of my strength was still to come. Autumn pressed on, the first hints of frost silvery on the grass. My world was steadying, but life had a way of sending tests just when you think you're finding your footing. One gray morning, as I was reading on the sofa, my phone buzzed. It was a call from an unfamiliar number. For a moment, I considered letting it ring, but something told me to answer. A measured male voice introduced himself as Detective Warren from the county's Financial Crimes Unit. He explained, gently but firmly, that the bank had flagged multiple suspicious attempts on my accounts, activity that had been traced back to Daniel's home computer and another device registered to Marissa's business. I sat, frozen, shame and dread rolling in my stomach. "We're investigating a cluster of elder financial abuse cases," the detective said. "We need to know if you're safe, and if you'd be willing to provide a statement." I thought about how far I'd come, how just weeks ago I might have lied, made excuses, protected Daniel and Marissa at my own expense. But I also thought about Nora. I couldn't let her grow up learning that love meant silence and denial. My voice shook, but I said, "Yes. I want to help. I want to tell the truth." Detective Warren arranged to meet at my apartment the next day. I spent the evening gathering documents, emails, text messages, bank alerts, every letter and legal threat I'd received since this nightmare began. I called Elaine, my voice trembling as I confessed the new betrayal. "You're doing the right thing," she reassured me. "You're not just standing up for yourself, you're protecting others, too." That night, sleep came only in fits and starts. I kept seeing Daniel as a boy, racing through the yard, certain I'd catch him if he fell. I mourned that little boy, and mourned the woman I used to be, the one who thought family meant safety, always. By morning, a strange calm had set in, the kind you feel after a long illness when you've decided to finally get out of bed. Detective Warren arrived promptly, his presence professional but kind. He laid out his recorder and began with easy questions, then moved to the painful ones: dates, names, the timeline of pressure, the threats, the violence. I answered everything, my voice gaining confidence as the story poured out. When I handed him my stack of printouts, he looked me in the eye and said, "You're not alone, Mrs. Burke. There are so many in your shoes. Your courage helps others find theirs." After he left, I felt raw, as if my skin had been peeled away. I made tea and sat by the window, staring at the patchwork of clouds, watching as sunlight broke through in ragged bursts. I tried to focus on small things: the whistle of the kettle, the flutter of a sparrow on the fire escape, the reassuring clatter of Mrs. Cho's broom in the hallway. The world, stubbornly, went on. Later that afternoon, I received a message from Daniel. It was short, almost frantic. "Did you talk to the police? What did you tell them?" My fingers hovered over the keys. I considered lying, softening the blow. But then I thought of everything I'd been through. I typed, "I told them the truth, Daniel." I couldn't hide it anymore. There was no reply. Days passed, each one stretching a little longer. I kept busy, helping Mrs. Cho repot her plants, attending support group meetings, and working on a scarf for Nora in shades of green and gold. The group had grown closer. We started calling ourselves the Wednesday Warriors, and for the first time, I felt pride, not shame, in sharing my story. Then, one evening, Marissa showed up at my door again, but she looked nothing like the woman from before. Her eyes were red, makeup streaked, hands trembling. "They know," she whispered. "The police came to our house, asked questions at my office. Daniel is furious. He blames me, he thinks I set this all in motion." She broke down sobbing, shoulders shaking with each breath. For a long moment, I watched her, feeling both pity and exhaustion. "You and Daniel made your choices," I said gently. "This isn't about blame, it's about accountability. For you, for him, and for me." Marissa shook her head, wiping her face. "I never meant for it to go this far. I thought if we had enough money, everything would be safe. I forgot what matters." She looked up at me, desperate. "What do I do now?" I didn't have all the answers. But I told her that the only way forward was through honesty. Face the truth. Take responsibility. Let Nora see her parents do what's right for once. It's the only chance you have to start again. She nodded, and for the first time, I saw her as human, not a villain, but a deeply flawed woman lost in her own fears. She hugged me, brief and awkward, and left without another word. That night, I finished Nora's scarf and wrapped it carefully, including a note: "You are loved. No matter what happens, that will never change." The act was bittersweet, but it felt right. A week later, Detective Warren called with an update. There would be an official inquiry, and it was possible charges would be filed. "Whatever happens," he said, "you've already won something important. You took your life back." That night, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker. For the first time in a long while, I felt strong, not untouched, not invincible, but whole. I had learned that standing up for yourself doesn't mean you stop loving those who hurt you. It means you finally love yourself enough to let them go. For everyone out there fighting a silent battle, know this: your truth matters. Comment below if you've ever had to speak up, even when your heart ached to stay silent. Subscribe to follow the rest of my journey. My story wasn't finished, and neither is yours. As the official inquiry moved forward, my days found a new rhythm. I began to measure time by small triumphs instead of looming dread: a morning spent at the market, a call from Elaine just to check in, the sound of Nora's giggle and a short voicemail Marissa let her leave. My heart still ached, but it ached less for what I'd lost and more for what I was learning to reclaim. I kept in close contact with Detective Warren, who updated me as he could. The investigation was now part of a larger county-wide review, with my case as one of several that would set a precedent. There were meetings with lawyers, long phone calls, and days when I was asked to recount details I would rather have forgotten. Sometimes, the weight of retelling pressed on my chest so hard I thought I might never breathe freely again. But each time I spoke the truth, the burden grew lighter. I was finding language for my pain, and in doing so, taking back control from those who had tried to silence me. The support group was my anchor. We met every Wednesday in the basement of the Methodist Church, sipping tea and sharing stories that would break most hearts if anyone outside those walls ever heard them. There was pride in our survival, in our refusal to disappear. Mrs. Cho joined us one evening, her quiet strength inspiring others to share things they'd held close for years. She told us about her brother, who had tried to force her out of their family home after their parents died, and how she'd fought for her place at the table. When she finished, we all applauded. Our scars were different, but the ache beneath was the same. Marissa kept her promise, letting Nora visit on weekends, often staying for tea herself. Our conversations were tentative, but less strained with every passing week. She never asked for money. Sometimes, she talked about her own childhood, the constant moving, the uncertainty, the way money was always either a lifeline or a weapon. "I don't want to live like that anymore," she admitted one evening. "I want Nora to feel safe." I nodded, believing her in small increments, one honest conversation at a time. Daniel, for his part, was quieter. He called once to let me know he'd started therapy, and again to say he was willing to answer the detective's questions honestly. "I'm not proud of what I did," he confessed. "But I want to do better, Mom. I have to." It was a beginning, not a resolution, but I cherished every inch of progress. On one crisp Saturday, Nora and I visited the botanical gardens. We walked the winding paths, stopping to admire late-blooming mums and the last of the zinnias, their fiery colors bright against the fading green. Nora chattered about school, about the class hamster, about her dreams of being an artist when she grew up. I listened, grateful for the ordinary joy of being a grandmother again. After we left the gardens, we stopped at a bakery for hot chocolate and a treat. Nora drew me a picture, a heart, surrounded by two stick figures holding hands. She slid it across the table, her eyes bright. "This is us," she said. I slipped the drawing into my purse, promising myself I'd frame it when I got home. That afternoon, I took Nora back to Daniel and Marissa's house. Daniel met us at the door, and for the first time in months, I saw a real warmth in his eyes. He hugged Nora, then turned to me, his gratitude unspoken but clear. We stood for a moment in the golden light, an uneasy but hopeful peace settling over us. The inquiry continued, sometimes painfully slow, other times moving in abrupt, unsettling bursts. There were headlines in the local paper about a new wave of elder financial abuse cases, though my name was never mentioned. I read each article, a strange pride mixing with the ache in my chest. Maybe my story could help protect someone else. Maybe this wasn't all for nothing. I returned to my writing, chronicling everything, not just the betrayals, but the victories, the small joys, the ways I'd pieced myself back together. My memoir writing class cheered me on, suggesting I share my work at a local reading. I was nervous, but Mrs. Cho insisted, promising to sit in the front row. On the night of the reading, I wore a deep blue sweater and my favorite pearl earrings. The library's meeting room was full of strangers and friends, all eager to hear voices like mine. I read aloud about heartbreak and hope, about losing and finding yourself in the most unlikely places. When I finished, there was silence, then applause, warm and sustaining. I saw Mrs. Cho beaming at me, her eyes shining with pride. Later, as I walked home under the pale light of the street lamps, I felt stronger than I had in years. The road ahead would still be hard, there would be more hearings, more conversations, maybe even more setbacks. But I was ready. For those of you listening who have found yourselves forced to rebuild from the rubble of family, I want you to know, you are more than what has been taken from you. Comment with your story below, or just let me know you're out there. Subscribe for the next part. My journey wasn't finished, and neither, I hope, is yours. Winter crept in early that year, frost dusting the window panes and the city settling into quieter rhythms. Life, too, grew quieter, less drama, more reflection. Yet beneath the calm, important things were shifting, not just for me, but for everyone touched by my story. The inquiry's pace picked up as the county moved to prosecute several cases, mine included. Detective Warren called to say a grand jury would hear evidence about the attempted fraud on my accounts. I spent several anxious days preparing, reviewing paperwork with Mr. Fishman, rehearsing my testimony, drawing courage from the Wednesday Warriors and from Elaine's nightly phone calls. I felt strong, but each time I imagined sitting before strangers and telling them what my son and daughter-in-law had done, I had to fight the urge to run and hide. The day came, clear and bitterly cold. I dressed in my warmest coat and met Mr. Fishman outside the courthouse, his presence steady beside me. Inside, the hearing room buzzed with low voices, nervous energy, the scraping of chairs. When my name was called, I took my seat, hands folded to keep them from shaking. I told the grand jury everything, how the pressure began, the manipulation, the violence, the calculated attempts to strip away my dignity and independence. I spoke of how hard it is to stand up to those you love most, of how shame and fear can keep you silent far too long. I shared not only the facts but also the ache, the sense of loss and betrayal, the journey of piecing myself back together, day by day. When I finished, the prosecutor thanked me for my courage, reminding me again that my story might help others find their voice. I stepped out into the hall, heart pounding, feeling both exposed and unburdened. Mr. Fishman told me I'd done more than defend myself, I'd opened the door for real change. I knew he was right. The weeks that followed brought more interviews and more paperwork, but also more connection. Women from all over the city began reaching out, sharing their own stories. The Wednesday Warriors expanded, we welcomed newcomers, some of them younger than I'd expected, some older, all with the same wounded strength. Together, we brainstormed ways to educate and support others, flyers at pharmacies, talks at the library, partnerships with local banks to spot financial abuse early. One morning, I received a call from the city's Office of Aging, inviting me to speak at a conference about protecting seniors' rights. At first, I hesitated. I was no expert, just a woman who survived. But Mrs. Cho and Elaine convinced me I owed it not just to myself, but to every person who'd ever been silenced. I agreed, and spent days preparing, practicing my story in the mirror, fine-tuning every word until I could say it without my voice breaking. The conference hall was packed that day, bright lights shining down, the buzz of anticipation humming through the crowd. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath and began, not with my pain, but with my survival. I spoke about boundaries and dignity, about how love doesn't excuse harm, about how shame can be defeated by truth. The applause at the end was overwhelming. I shook hands with strangers who thanked me for putting words to feelings they'd never dared speak. That night, Daniel called. For the first time, he sounded calm, almost at peace. "I heard about the conference," he said. "I'm proud of you, Mom. I know I hurt you. I hope someday you'll forgive me." I told him forgiveness was a process, not a finish line, but that I was willing to walk it with him. He cried then, not out of self-pity but out of something like release. We talked about Nora, about the ways she was growing, about how neither of us wanted to pass on a legacy of pain. It wasn't a neat ending, but it was honest, and that was enough for now. Marissa sent a note, too, a real card, handwritten, simple. "Thank you for giving me another chance. I'm working on myself, for Nora. For all of us." I tucked the card into my drawer, right beside Nora's drawing and my court papers. It was a small thing, but it mattered. With the inquiry still moving, I threw myself into community work. The support group started a fund to help seniors pay for legal advice, and I volunteered to visit nursing homes to share information. I met so many brave souls, people who'd lost much more than I had, but who fought every day to reclaim their power. Their stories became part of mine, and I found purpose blooming where I'd once only seen loss. Nora's visits became more frequent and easy. We baked cookies, built snowmen, and read every book in my apartment twice. She asked fewer questions about the past, more about the future. "Will you come to my art show?" she asked, and I promised I'd be there, front row, cheering her on. She was the living proof that love can outlast even the worst storms. One late afternoon, after a meeting with the Wednesday Warriors, I found myself pausing in the park, watching the sunset bleed pink and gold across the snow. I thought of how far I'd come, and how many women, like me, are walking out of the shadows. I pulled out my phone and recorded a message for those following my story. "You don't have to walk through this alone. Your pain is real, your courage is enough, and your story matters. If you need help, reach out. If you've survived, share your hope. Together, we can change what family means." If you're still with me, if you've watched my journey or felt your own pain echoed here, leave a comment, subscribe, and share this story. The final chapter was coming, and I finally understood. Healing is not about returning to who you were, but becoming someone braver than you ever thought you could be. Spring arrived at last, sunlight melting the last traces of snow from the sidewalks, the city stretching and stirring back to life. I found myself walking more, taking long meandering routes through the neighborhood, noticing things I'd forgotten to see for years: crocuses bursting through patches of earth, neighbors sweeping their stoops, children flying kites over the park. The world felt new, and, in a quiet way, so did I. The inquiry wrapped up with little fanfare but much relief. Daniel and Marissa both agreed to restitution and mandatory counseling. The charges, while serious, became an opportunity for healing rather than further destruction. The judge commended my strength and candor in court, urging us all to remember what truly matters in family. Walking out of the courthouse for the last time, I felt a lightness in my chest I hadn't known in years. Elaine called that afternoon, her voice brimming with pride. "You did it, big sister. You changed more than just your own life." It was true. The Wednesday Warriors grew from a handful of voices to a chorus. We started an annual conference, partnering with local organizations to provide legal clinics, financial literacy classes, and a safe space for people who, like me, needed to learn that survival was not shameful but honorable. At the first event, Mrs. Cho spoke bravely about her own journey, her voice unwavering. I watched as women of every age and background nodded along, tears streaming down faces both wrinkled and young. That day, I finally believed what had happened to me could be transformed into something powerful for others. At home, life settled into a rhythm I could claim as my own. Nora visited almost every weekend, her drawings now filling my refrigerator door. She grew taller, her laughter brighter, her questions easier. We baked lemon bars, planted tomatoes on my balcony, and spent quiet afternoons reading curled up together. She sometimes asked about the hard times, but less often now, and always with a sense of safety. Daniel came by, too, humbler, still working through his own wounds. We talked, not just about the past, but about dreams for the future, about Nora's school, about the possibility of forgiveness that didn't erase responsibility. Marissa continued to show up for therapy, sometimes inviting me for tea, sometimes just sending a message to check in. She once told me, "I never thought I could change. I thought my choices were just who I was. But I see now that we all get another chance, if we're willing to be honest about what we've done." Her words lingered, a bittersweet echo of everything we'd survived. I kept writing, both for myself and for others. My memoir class encouraged me to submit a story to a national magazine, and to my shock, it was accepted. Letters poured in, strangers from across the country, men and women who saw themselves in my words, who wanted to say, "Me too." Some were just beginning their own fights, others had lost more than I ever had, but all of them had the same ache for dignity, for peace, for the right to decide their own story. I answered every letter, holding space for every truth. That summer, I attended Nora's art show, standing proudly in the front row as she described her painting of two women in a garden, one young, one old, both smiling beneath a sky filled with swirling colors. She called it resilience. The crowd clapped, and as she ran into my arms, I realized how much had healed. I'd lost so much, yes, but I'd found myself, too, a self I thought I'd buried beneath fear and silence. The support group fund helped dozens of seniors secure safe housing and legal protection. We celebrated every small win together, a woman regaining access to her accounts, a man reconciling with his son, another finally able to sleep through the night. Each story a victory, each voice another piece of evidence that the cycle could be broken. The final phone call from Detective Warren came quietly one afternoon, as sunlight streamed across my kitchen table. "The case is officially closed, Mrs. Burke," he said. "You did more than survive. You helped change the way this city protects its elders." I hung up, my hands steady, my heart full. As seasons changed again, I made a habit of walking to the little stone bridge over Mill Creek every Sunday. Sometimes I brought Nora, sometimes just a book and a thermos of tea. I looked at my reflection in the water and saw not just a survivor, but a woman restored, not perfect, not unscarred, but whole. I could face my own gaze now, unafraid. Looking back, I understood that the real gift wasn't victory in court or even reconciliation. It was learning to trust my own worth, to know that love is only true when it's freely given, not bartered, not coerced, not tangled in fear. And it was learning that letting go, sometimes, is the most courageous act of all. So if you're listening, if you felt invisible, betrayed, or afraid to tell your story, know this: you matter. Your voice matters. You deserve respect, no matter what anyone says or how lonely it sometimes feels. Healing isn't a single moment, it's 1,000 small choices to keep moving forward, even when it hurts. If my story touched something inside you, if you recognize your own struggles or victories here, I hope you'll share your journey in the comments below. Your words might be the hope someone else needs tonight. Subscribe for more stories of survival and strength, and share this with someone who needs to know they're not alone. Because none of us should have to walk through darkness by ourselves, and together, our stories become the light. Thank you for listening, for witnessing, for believing with me that every ending can be a beginning.